Welcome to this pre-recorded introductory session for feedback on Pearson Edexcel GCSE 9-1 Physical Education Summer 2022 Components 1 and 2. In this session we will provide feedback on national performance of candidates on Pearson Edexcel GCSE Components 1 and 2 on the 2022 examination series. We will consider a range of responses in a variety of questions and explain how marks were awarded. Discuss both principal examiner reports via candidate responses. Please note that the principal examiner reports for paper 1 and 2 will be available within your pack of supporting documents. This session will last 1 hour, but can be paused at any time. There will be instances where you will be asked to pause the session and consult the mark schemes. After the session, it will be beneficial if both paper 1 and 2 principal examiner reports were consulted. Both reports provide in-depth feedback and analysis of both papers. Principal examiner reports, question papers and mark schemes for both paper 1 and 2 can be found with your pack of supporting materials. To begin, let's remind ourselves of the assessment structure and some of the changes that were announced in July this year. The qualification has 2 examined papers. Paper 1 is worth 36% and paper 2 is worth 24% of the total qualification. The remaining 40% is a non-examined assessment referred to as NEA. Support materials and details in relation to NEA can be found on the Pearson website, link included within slide 48. The focus of this session is solely upon both written examination papers. The value of the papers differs as component 1 covers more content than component 2. Therefore, the length of the paper and marks awarded are greater for component 1. Each assessment is designed to allow candidates thinking time. There are a range of question types on each paper, from multiple choice questions through to extended open response questions. The use of data is also tested across both papers. It is very important to note that there are no changes to the content. The changes are for the first assessment in 2023. Each paper is now split up into 3 sections, A, B and C, and focuses on a particular topic from the specification. Each paper has a 10-mark reduction, with 1 AO1 mark and a 9-mark question removed. Only paper 1 has had a reduction in time, now lasting 1 hour 30 minutes. It is also important to note that the only command word that will be used for each of the 9-mark extended questions will be evaluate across both paper 1 and paper 2. Both exam papers will have a multiple choice questions, short answer questions and longer answer questions, but the number of each question type will vary between the exam papers. Multiple choice questions will have 4 options. The candidate has to select the correct option. These question types tend to focus on recall of knowledge, AO1, although they can also assess application of knowledge, e.g. selecting the most appropriate training method for a particular sports person, AO2. Short answer questions require 1-word answers, e.g. labelling a component of the heart or a muscle. The command words associated with these types of questions tend to be state, label, identify, predict, complete. Longer answer questions will use different command words, e.g. describe, explain, examine, analyse, and will be worth more marks. Examples of the 3 types of questions are shown on this slide. The final question type is the extended response. These are the essay questions where the candidate's quality of response is considered, rather than simply how many correct statements are made. These questions assess 3 assessment objectives: knowledge, application, and the ability to evaluate. There is now only 1 extended response question on each paper, each worth 9 marks. A maximum of 3 marks for each assessment objective. 2 examples of extended questions are shown on this slide. Questions are assessed in 2 ways. Points-based mark schemes reward every appropriate point within a mark. Levels-based mark schemes do reward correct content, but the quality of the response is also considered in terms of how the knowledge is used in the response and applied to give logic, reason arguments, justify points being made. Extended responses are assessed through levels-based mark schemes. Let us now take a look at the grade boundary for this year's components. The top image shows the overall grade boundary for GCSE PE, whereas the second image details the boundaries for both paper 1 and paper 2, with the last image showing total number of candidates and the number achieving each grade. Let us now look at candidates' performance on multiple choice questions. Each question will start with a specific command word. There is a list of command words on the website which gives a complete taxonomy of words which might be used in any one exam. Multiple choice questions are designed to be accessible to most candidates, although some questions on both papers prove more challenging than others. The slide shows each multiple choice question for both components in order of mean mark. The data between the two papers, multiple choice questions, are very similar, with the most difficult multiple choice question for paper 1 being 1F, with a mean mark of 0.66, whereas paper 2's most difficult multiple choice question was 1C, with a mean mark of 0.57. To see further analysis of the multiple choice questions, please see the principal examiner reports for both paper 1 and paper 2. We will now look at some example student responses to short answer question from this year's papers. You may find it helpful to refer to the paper mark schemes, and you may want to pause the presentation after each slide to allow you to do that. Remember, full question papers and mark schemes for both papers are within your pack. This slide gives an example of a short answer question from paper 1, question 2C. The command word used is state. This candidate states the phrase control, gaining 1 mark. As you can see from the statistics, this posed some challenge for candidates, with only 67.4% of the cohort gaining 1 mark. This example for the same question demonstrates where a candidate didn't perform so well. The candidate does not refer to the term conscious control or other appropriate terms regarding skeletal muscles being under our control. This slide gives an example of a short answer question from paper 1, question 4B. The command word used is state. The candidate correctly states the correct agonist and antagonist that cause extension at the elbow, gaining 2 marks. The underlined sections demonstrate good exam technique by the candidate, as they have clearly crossed out their incorrect answer. This should always be reinforced to candidates, as on these types of questions the candidate's first response will be marked. The stats on the right hand side of the slide show that the majority of candidates either got 2 or 0 marks. This was quite an accessible question, with 70.3% of candidates gaining both marks. This example for the same question demonstrates where a candidate didn't perform so well. The candidate fails to identify either muscle correctly, instead naming the wrist. Although underlining key terms within the question is very good exam technique, this candidate has slightly overused this technique, maybe causing confusion. This slide shows an example of a short answer question from paper 2, question 2B. The command word used is describe. This candidate clearly describes team sports for the first marking point, and then follows this point up with reference to creating tactics, gaining the second mark. This candidate gains both marks on offer for this question. It is clear from the stats that this was a challenging question to score 2 marks on. A high number of candidates gained the first marking point for team sport, but found it difficult to develop their response. This example for the same question demonstrates where a candidate didn't perform so well. The candidate does gain the first marking point for reference to teammates / communicating on the field and working together, but fails to expand upon this with no reference to how cooperation is improved. This slide gives an example response of a short answer question from paper 2. The candidates were required to state 2 differences between a basic and a complex skill. Just over half of the candidates scored at least 1 mark, but struggled to gain full marks. This was mainly due to repetition of points in response 1 and 2. An example of a full mark response is shown on this slide. The candidate has clearly identified points 2 and 4 from the mark scheme with no repetition. This example for the same question demonstrates where a candidate didn't perform so well. The candidate correctly states basic skills require little to no concentration and gains 1 mark, but doesn't gain any further credit within response 1, as it is a repetition of point 2 of the mark scheme, demonstrating by the underlined text on the slide. Candidate doesn't score any further credit as response 2 relates to effort. This slide gives an example response of a short answer question from paper 2. The command word used in this question is explain. The question asks candidates to explain why targets should be realistic and time-bound. The response seen on the slide is just from the first section to the question relating to realistic. The candidate is awarded 2 marks for correctly explaining that having realistic targets makes them manageable, stopping them becoming demotivated. Candidates mostly achieve well on this question, with 84.4% achieving either 1 or 2 marks. This example for the same question demonstrates where a candidate didn't perform as well. This candidate gains 1 mark for making reference to target being too easy or too difficult, but they don't gain the second marking point as there is no explanation of the impact on performance. Let us now summarise what candidates did well on short answer questions. When candidates performed well, questions were read carefully, responses already provided in the question were not repeated, and the question context was used to arrive at the correct answer. Candidates also used appropriate terminology to reinforce their understanding and include sporting examples where necessary. See further analysis of the short answer questions. Please see the principal examiner reports for both paper 1 and 2. We will now look at some example student responses to longer answer questions for this year from this year's papers. You will find it helpful again to refer to the question paper and mark schemes within your pack. You may want to pause the presentation after each slide to allow you to do that. The longer answer questions across both component 1 and 2 are still marked using a points-based mark scheme. The typical command words used within these question types are describe and explain. The candidate's responses need to be linked and show some form of development throughout the response. This slide gives an example of a long answer question from paper 1. Question 2D asks candidates to explain, use an example, why involuntary muscles are important during sport or physical activity. The candidate gains all 3 marks for stating not under our conscious control, with an example of blood vessels and a link to their importance within sport. This proved to be a challenging question for candidates, with only 24.7% gain all 3 marks and a large percentage gaining no marks for this question. This example for the same question demonstrates where a candidate didn't perform as well. The candidate fails to get full marks on this response as they missed the first aspect of the mark scheme regarding involuntary muscles not being under our conscious control. The candidate does gain 2 marks for this response for correctly stating an example, cardiac muscle, and for stating its importance within sport regarding the delivery of oxygenated blood to the body. This slide gives another example of a longer answer question from paper 1 worth 4 marks. Question 3C asked candidates to explain why the cardiovascular system needs to regulate a games player's body temperature when they play sport. This candidate gains full marks for this response. The candidate gains the first mark for an example of increased work rate, running, and the second marking point, heat increases. They then gain the last 2 marks for vasodilation and cool the player down. It is important to note on this response that the candidate does make another valid point relating to performance and the positive impact upon concentration. The majority of candidates did gain some credit on this question, with only 11.9% gaining no marks. The candidates that struggled to gain high marks in this question not only lack knowledge relating to body temperature regulation, but also lack structure within their response and would have benefited from planning out their response before beginning. This example, for the same question, demonstrates where a candidate didn't perform well. The candidate does not gain any credit for this response as no rewardable material is present due to this discussion of being too cold and vasoconstriction. In this final example of a longer answer question, 6B from paper 2, candidates were asked to explain why concurrent feedback from the football coach could improve the performance of their football team. It would be advisable now to view the response Pause the presentation to consult the mark scheme and formulate what score you think the answer was given out of a possible 3 marks. Then restart the presentation to see the mark total and where the marks were given. The candidate gains the first marking point for correctly explaining concurrent feedback happens during the game. The second mark is awarded for telling the goalkeeper to come off his line, demonstrating how a coach can use it to improve performance. The third mark is awarded for stating that this allows them to catch it before the opponent, showing a linked expansion relating to performance. The statistics demonstrate that the question differentiated very well, with the full range of marks from 0 to 3 being awarded, with 20.3% of candidates gaining 3 marks. This example for the same question demonstrates where a candidate didn't perform as well. This is a typical response for this question, where the candidate gains the first 2 marking points but fails to include a linked expansion to performance. The candidate gains the first marking point for explaining this type of feedback happens during the game, and then gains a second mark for players can change what they are doing wrong. This slide summarises what candidates did well and what they didn't do so well on the longer answer questions. They required knowledge was recalled and applied correctly to the context provided in the question. Ideas were expressed clearly with appropriate examples where required. Understanding and higher order thinking skills were demonstrated by clearly developing ideas following through points in depth. The candidates that did not do so well on these questions sometimes did not use the correct question context. Candidates found it difficult to develop their response and lacked application or the required analysis and evaluation. Please also consult the principal examiner reports for both paper 1 and 2, which will provide further insight into all longer answer questions. Both reports can be found within your pack of supporting documents. Finally, we will now look at some example student responses to extended answer questions from this year's papers. You may find it helpful again to refer to the question paper and mark schemes. You may want to pause the presentation after each slide to allow you to do that. The extended answer questions are 9-mark questions, and there are now 1 on each paper. Unlike the other questions on the papers, these have a levels-based mark scheme. 3 marks are available for each of the assessment objectives. Candidates need to demonstrate development of response similar to the longer answer questions. For purposes of this presentation, we will consider 1 extended question from each paper. This slide contains the 2 extended answer questions from component 1 and the statistics for both questions. It is clearly evident that the candidate's performance on both extended answer questions is very similar. Question 12 proved to be slightly less accessible, as a higher percentage of candidates gained 0 marks. The full range of marks were awarded for both questions. We will now look at our first extended answer question, which will be question 12 from paper 1. Question 12 from paper 1 asked the candidate to evaluate the importance of these 3 training methods in improving Mason's fitness to make him a better sprinter. Please view this slide and the next one before pausing the presentation to formulate what score you think this response was awarded. This is an example of a level 3 response and 9 marks. Each mark has been highlighted throughout this slide and the next one. The first paragraph relating to continuous training gains 3 marks. The first mark for stating that continuous training is constant, 20 minutes or over, is an AO1 statement. AO2 is awarded for the link between continuous training improving cardiovascular fitness. AO3 is awarded for the reference to this type of training being the least useful to a sprinter. The second paragraph regarding plyometric training has 3 relevant points. AO1 is created for plyometric training involving jumping. 2 AO2 statements are present, the first for developing power and the second for power allows them to have a quick start off the blocks. No AO3 statement is present in this paragraph. The response gains further credit at the top of this slide for developing speed, which is an AO2 statement. AO1 is achieved for the statement referring to sprinting and resting. The candidate gains an AO3 for interval training for stating speed is essential to be the quickest and win the race. If this was all the candidate had wrote, they would have gained 8 marks even though they had made 9 points. This is due to the fact that the candidate wouldn't have included an AO3 statement relating to plyometrics rather than making 2 AO2 statements. The candidate throughout the response made 4 AO2 statements, but only 3 can be credited for each AO. This candidate, however, does go on to get the 9th mark, as within the concluding paragraph the candidate states, interval training and plyometric training is the most important as it is likely to improve sprint time, gaining the 3rd AO for plyometrics. This allows the candidate to gain full marks for this response. This is an example of a level 1 response from the same question. The response is vague and confused at times, linking the cardiovascular system to the wrong training methods. The only mark present within this response is for the statement referring to the best takeoff as possible as an alternative to better drive from the blocks. This candidate provides a level 1 response with 1 mark out of 9 awarded. This slide contains the 2 extended answer questions and the statistics for both questions from paper 2. It is clearly evident that the candidate's performance on both extended answer questions is very similar across the majority of marks. The full range of marks were awarded for both questions. We will now look at our second and final extended answer question, which will be question 15 from paper 2. Question 15 from paper 2 asks the candidates to evaluate the 3 other personal factors which can negatively impact on an adult's participation in sport. Please now view this slide, pause the presentation to consult the mark scheme, and formulate what score you think the answer was awarded out of a possible 9 marks. Then restart the presentation to see the mark total and where the marks were awarded. This is an example of a level 3 response and 7 marks. Each mark has been highlighted throughout this slide. The first line contains 3 AO1 statements for referring to 3 personal factors. The candidate then makes 2 AO2 statements relating to disability. No credit has been awarded for his equipment can be expensive, so stops them participating, as this statement is not linked to the socio-economic factor. The second paragraph relating to age gains an AO2 for less free time in adulthood. The last mark for this response is gained on the right-hand side relating to the socio-economic factor relating to the sport of golf. This response includes 3 AO1s, 3 AO2s, and 1 AO3, gaining an overall mark of 7. It is very important to remember here that even if a candidate makes multiple AOs about the same area, as in this response, 2 AOs regarding disability, they can be awarded up to the maximum of 3 marks for an AO. This is an example of a level 1 response, and 2 marks were awarded out of a possible 9. Each mark has again been highlighted. The response gains an AO2 statement within the first paragraph for referring to adults having less free time due to work and looking after children. The second AO2 is awarded within the third paragraph regarding expense of membership fees in context of low income. It is important to note in this response that although age, disability and socioeconomic factors are not identified, credit can be awarded where sufficient context is provided to identify the factor, as in this response. To see further analysis of the extended answer questions, please see the Principal Examiner reports for both Paper 1 and 2. On this slide, a number of common issues relating to extended answer questions are listed. Where candidates fail to score marks above a level 1 response, they lack structure, with no pre-planning, struggle to answer the question that was asked, and lacked any real developed points, providing mainly descriptive points. This slide shows a good approach to an extended answer question. This example is related to Paper 1, Question 12. The highest scoring candidates follow this pattern by writing paragraphs that progress through the AOs, demonstrating their full understanding of the question. As in this example, a good approach to these extended answer questions is for students to write a developed paragraph about each point they want to make. For example, demonstrate knowledge, then apply that knowledge, perhaps using an example, then refer to the impact on performance. An example of a developed response is on this slide, which gains credit for each of the assessment objectives. Getting students to write after each statement whether they think it is an AO1 to 3 is a good way to improve their knowledge of how to answer these types of questions, while also providing valuable information to the teacher to inform future planning. This slide contains two very useful links. The first being the Pearson PE website, containing all the information you need from the specification, sample assessments, exam materials, forms and administration, and lots of teaching and learning materials. It is also the place where you can keep up to date with any course changes. The second link is to the Pearson Exam Wizard, which really is a fantastic tool to help prepare your students for their upcoming exams. As the image shows, you can look at all recent papers, build your own paper, focusing in on certain topic areas, which can then be saved on Exam Wizard for future use or exported to Microsoft Word. This really does speed up the design of tests to check student progress and allows mark scheme and principal examiner reports to be attached to your chosen questions. To find out more about the excellent number of courses that Pearson can offer, please visit the link on this slide that will take you to the Pearson's Professional Development Academy website. This is where you will be able to select PE and choose from a number of bespoke training courses. Thank you for taking the time to follow this training course. I hope it has been very informative and will help you and your students progress even further this academic year.